I'll save this notes. I'll give it to all of you, so don't worry about it. I'll just give you a basic network security term so that we begin the course at a very good pace. So there are some key network security terms that we often use in your network security, right? The term may be asset. So what is asset? So asset is anything which the organization is invested for. For example, the building of the organization is an asset, right? The vehicles that is part of the organization, that becomes an asset. The furniture, the machines, the IT devices, for example, start from connectors to cables to your any equipments that is part of the organization, that becomes your asset. Something like intangible asset, right? So all those anything which is the organization has invested, that is your asset, right? Which could be for example, this could be your properties, right? Property, it could be your vehicles, it could be your any IT equipments, right? That is called as asset in terms of network security term. Okay, next term that I want to talk about is called as something called as vulnerability. So all of you have heard about this term called as vulnerability, right? So what is vulnerability? According to me, I can say vulnerability, it can be defined as a weakness in a system, right? Or in its design. So every system, it is made by human. So we have a chances of creating some sort of weakness in that particular system while manufacturing it, or in the design uh, of that particular system. So chances of any errors, any mistake are always there, right? For any type of devices that is humanly made. So vulnerabilities are always there in in your applications, in network protocols, in your operating systems. So more your devices are vulnerable, more your devices are giving errors. So chances are there that the attacker can gain access to your organization network, and they can exploit this vulnerability, right? So vulnerability, you can think like as a very simple term, it's called as a weakness. So weakness in a system or in its design, right? Which can make your applications to become vulnerable, right? Your network protocols to become vulnerable, right? Your OS to become vulnerable. So if you're, for example, think about a computer, right? A computer has got application, it has got protocols running inside it, it got an OS running inside it. If I have some vulnerability lying on those individual item, an attacker can can exploit this vulnerability, right? The word is called as exploit. The next term is called as exploit. Okay, this is important. Exploit. So what is the meaning of exploit? Exploit means it is a method or tool, right, by which an attacker can gain access to a vulnerable device, or a vulnerable application, and it can cause damage to the target network, or target system, right? So basically I can say exploit is a method, right? Exploit is a method which is taken by any attackers, right, to exploit, to find vulnerability first, and if it is vulnerable, then try to gain access to it, right? So there are multiple ways exploit can be made. they if you heard about the term like spoofing, right? IP spoofing, heard about the term like phishing, right? What do you say, now cross-site scripting, right? Think about those cybersecurity terms. So an attacker using different tools and methods to evade those defense line, and reaching your target, because the targets are vulnerable for the attacker. It found it, and it's easy for them to do the exploitation, right? Then we have got a term called as something called as threat, right? So threat is very, very important. So threat can be defined as anything that is causing danger to an asset, right? It is a danger to an asset. So think about these threats could be accidentally triggered, or it could be intentionally created by the attackers, right, on your system or on your equipments, right? So threats could be many types. So I don't want to explain you all those types of threat, but yeah, if you really want to do a deep dive, just do some Google work on those terms like, spyware, right? Terms like hackers, terms like viruses, right? Those are all your threats. For example, keyloggers, okay? For example, data loss or lost data, however we're going to say it, Trojan, right? Trojan or Trojan horse. Think about, identity theft, identity theft, right? Malwares, right? Malwares, zombies, right? Botnets. So those are all your terms that is based on threat, right? It's a very simple thing to understand. Everybody understand the basic term of it. No need to explain more into those things. But yes, do a small amount of Google search on those terms. You will be understanding the definitions of it. Okay. Another terms, those are really important is like, rootkits. They are very much important because they actually target your hard drive of your device, and they can exploit it. Okay. Worms, because they can travel from one device to other device over a network, right? A lot of things. Next term is called as attack. So attack is basically where you are taking a action, right? The action that is taken by an attacker to harm an asset. Very, very simple word. It's an action taken by any attacker to harm an asset, right? So there are a lot of tools what the attacker can use, and they can, by using those tools, they can send the application to the targeted vulnerable device, and that vulnerable device can be a source of attack or can be a point of your attack, right? And once that vulnerable device is found, I mean, we can actually take the command and control of that particular device, right? So it's very important. Your job is to mitigate attacks. Our job, the network, we are called as blue team, right? There is red team, there is blue team. So we are part of blue team. So blue team job is to mitigate the attacks. Red team job is to create the attacks. Okay. So as a first line of defense, we are into blue team, and we are trying to figure it out. What are the different types of threats which can come into my organization? What are the vulnerabilities currently we have inside my organization? Figuring those out, and trying to evade the attacks. All right. The next time that comes in my mind is called as risk. Very, very important term. Okay. So risk can be defined as a potential for loss. Anything that can be easily compromised or getting damaged, right? Which can cause some negative consequence to an organization asset. As simple as that. So risk can arise from multiple terms, like if you have a threat, if you have multiple threats, which can have a negative effect to your organization asset, that is called as a risk. So for me, risk is actually this. So I can say risk is equals to asset, the organization that is having it. Okay. The organization that is currently having the asset, and you add the threats that is part of the organization asset, and how much your assets are vulnerable, right? How much assets are vulnerable, right? Based on that, this is the proportion of risk calculation that your organization will do, right? For example, let's say we have got a wireless AP, wireless access point, right? Chances are, I mean, it has got some open ports of TCP, okay? And chances are, I mean, those ports are open for my users, internal users. But we know that if these ports are open, there is a chances of threats. But we have to open this port for my users, right? So it's like, man in the middle. I mean, balancing the act in the middle. For example, opening TCP port number 80, it is always a bad idea. But we want 80 has to be open because I've got some servers that talks HTTP, right? So the pros and the cons, right? So assessing whether this AP could be a risk factor is your calculation now, because you have opened a port. That port could be vulnerable to a lot of attacks. And what if an attack take place on port number 80, right? What will happen after this? What all targeted PCs or targeted applications the attacker can gain access to. So all those calculations has to come up in your mind, right? Which will formulate something called as risk. Okay. So risk is very important. It is very, very important term for the cybersecurity professionals. So if you have done your, if you think about CISA, like we have got a course called as information security auditor, right? So CISA people, they will actually come to your organization and they will say, let me find out how much amount of risk your organization is currently happening. And they will do months and months of, calculation of every devices and every ports and protocols, and they'll figure it out one chart for you. Okay. This is called as risk. The more the amount of asset you have, the more the amount of threats you will have, and the more the amount of vulnerable your threats can become, right? So more chances of risk. Now, to mitigate risk, we use the term called as countermeasure. Please mute yourself. To mitigate the risk, we use the term called as countermeasure. And what is countermeasure? So countermeasure, I can say it's an action, right, which is initiated by the organization, right? For example, typically the blue team. So you understand what is blue team now? We are all part of blue team, right? So the organization, the blue team, the good team, the good security team, the countermeasure, the action that we can initiate to protect the assets from different types of threats or some sort of vulnerabilities. Okay. There is another thing called as circle of risk. So you guys just Google it. Okay, circle of risk. You'll find a term like that. Let me try to draw it for you. So what happens here is one second. So what happens is, the organization has got something called as threat, right? So this threat, let me come in that way. So for example, you have got an asset, right? This asset can have threat. Because of threats, you can have attacks. Okay, because of attacks, the reason of attacks, because if attack is happening, that means your devices are vulnerable. Your applications, or the point of attack that has happened because your devices or the app was vulnerable, right? And that is the cause of risk. That is, you can have a risk calculation now, and you can take some countermeasure to prevent that particular risk, right? And again, the countermeasure is taken based on the asset. So this operation that we do, it is called as circle of risk. It's basically a cybersecurity term. Okay. So as a blue team, you do some sort of job. The first job is called as I'll just type it rather writing it. So as a blue team, when there is attack which takes place, you have something called as vulnerability. This is a very bad word to type. Vulnerability identification. Okay, so as a blue team, you identify what are the vulnerability you have right now. Then you do identify the vulnerability, and then you do analysis of the vulnerability. Then you do a risk assessment. Okay, that's your step. And then you go ahead and take about the remediation solution. You think about the products and the tools which you will take for doing remediation. All right. So I want you guys to do some Google search on those terms, and it's very, very important. Okay. Another term that I have in my mind, it is called as encryption. It's very important, guys. Encryption and hashing. So for me, encryption is basically what? Scrambling of your data, right? Scrambling of clear text data before it's delivered. Before it's delivered to the destination, right? So the destination, when he receives it, he should do what? Decryption. So all of you know these things, but it is important. There are different algorithms that works to encrypt and decrypt your data. I mean, we have got the ciphertext algorithms, like heard about 3DES, heard about AES, right? I mean, normally there are different versions of AES and all. So we take, AES 250, 256, AES 512, and all those things. There are others, right? Diffie-Hellman and all those things, right? So do a basic research on encryption and encryption types. That will help you out to learn more. And hashing is a very important term which is used for integrity of your data. Integrity of data. So for example, I'm sending data from me to you. I'm sending the letter hello, right? So data has to leave from my PC to your PC, and in the middle we have got public internet, right? So in the middle of this internet, what can happen is somebody can tamper my data and it can take the original piece and it can input the duplicate piece, right? So hello was the original one, might be right now I have a hello which looks like this, hello. Right? So somebody might do some tampering of your data, and because of which, if you receive a tampered data, I mean, the tampered data can have vulnerability, can have malwares into it, and you might infect yourself if you receive that. There is a reason. What happens is there are different hashing algorithm which is used before the data is sent, right? One of the important ones are MD5 hashes. We have got SHA, we have got HMAC, SHA, and all those stuff, right? So by using those different hashing algorithms, what you do is you generate a hashing code, right? And that code, for example, it was 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8. Okay, so this code was generated by running the hashing algorithm on this data called as hello. So once you receive the data, the recipient will also run the same algorithm on that data that he received. If the code received is same 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8, it is a valid data, it was not tampered. But if the data was tampered, so your code will differ. If the code differs, that means your data is was tampered in the middle, and you might experience vulnerabilities. There is a reason, if data is not integrity matched, so you don't accept it, and your PCs, your endpoints, have the capability of doing it. All right, so make sure you research on those terms, and you get a good gist out of it.